And welcome back, subscribers. Today, we'll be running through a very interesting case study of our senior advisor, Jonathan Laws, who joins us all the way from Richmond. Good morning, Jonathan.
Morning, Dom.
So, the case, what happened was, Jonathan had a client where they ended up being awarded an extra £97,000 in terms of their transfer out value. John, could you start off by giving us a bit of a summary so our clients can understand what happened here?
Yeah, so I had a client, actually quite a famous client, so you'll never find out who it is, who got in touch. Well, his financial advisor got in touch. He was a US resident, lives in California. This financial advisor basically said, "Look, I've got my client here. Oh, here comes the office dog. I have my client here who has been he's got an old UK pension. I don't really know what to do with it. I've been trying to help him out. It's not really my area of expertise. I seem to be going around in circles. Can you help?" So I was like, well, yeah, that happens all the time. A lot of people in the US, typically went over earlier, have built up significant wealth, already have a US advisor, but still might have significant assets left back in the UK. So I said, right, send it over. I believe it was an Aviva pension. Send it all over. I got all the forms, reviewed it all, and some of the key things that kind of came out of it was the fact that obviously this client, well, I say obviously, you don't know, the client was 76 years old. Now, under the rules of the UK pensions, after 75, you can't really take any other option. 75 is the last age where you can kind of make a decision of what you're going to be doing with the pension. But because the scheme had been faffing around for so long, struggling to deal with a non-UK resident and a US resident in particular. But it was an old annuity style pension, which is where they had to convert it into annuity. The problem is the pension couldn't be provided. They couldn't provide an annuity to a US resident, so they were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. So the only option was, in reality, was to transfer out to a scheme, that had more flexible benefits, which should have been done a few years ago, effectively. But it took them that long to get there, and that's where we come in, and we were asked to help and assist here.
So, first of all, something that's screaming out to me is, why do we have an organisation with a US resident client if they're unable to provide them with what's required of them? I know we'll get into the details of the 97 grand shortly, but could you comment on that, please?
Yeah, it's a bit of a hangover from the pension freedoms, really, from what I can see. When the pension freedoms came out prior to that, absolutely everyone was annuitising their pension. I think the numbers, I'd say absolutely everyone, is about 90%. Ever since then, for non-UK residents, it's gotten harder and harder to service them, with the US in particular. Providing financial services to a US resident is incredibly difficult, and it usually involves needing to get registered or authorized in some shape or form in the US as well, which obviously a lot of these firms are not going to want to do or can do. So, it's one of those, and it happens all the time. You got some people who go, "Hey, I've got this pension here. It's got safeguarded benefits. I need advice on whether it's a good idea to transfer or not." And then you end up going for this whole rigmarole. But in reality, staying where they are isn't even an option, but you've sort of got to pretend it is an option. It's a really weird position because, if they stay where they are, you can annuitize it, but actually they can't annuitize it because they can only provide them to UK residents or residents that aren't in the US. So it's a really common thing we find, and a kind of quirk in the system that hasn't really been resolved. And in reality, the only way to resolve it is to utilize one of the few firms that can help, like Cameron James. So yeah, it was a bit of an odd one there, and I was surprised myself when, in this situation, because it's rare to see someone in a pension like that, literally saying on the documents, you have to make this decision before the age of 75. And I was like, he's 76. Why are you still giving us because we can't actually provide him with any of the options. The only option we can give him is the please leave option. So, yes, it was a bit of an odd one.
So how, in the end, was the extra £97,000? How did you push for that? Or how did Cameron James push for that? What were the mechanics of that, and how long did it take?
Yeah, so at the beginning, it was a typical fact-finding experience, find out what exactly is with the schemes, what's required to give advice, how's it invested, what are the charges, what are the options, and we gave formal advice, which was, to transfer to a nice low-cost, SIPP designed for non-UK residents, invest in the globally diversified low-cost portfolio and work together with his existing financial advisor to give him help him achieve all his dreams, goals, and aspirations in retirement, which looks like he will be able to do. But one of the things that really stuck out for me that I found very odd was on his 75th birthday, because they were like, right, well, he's got to make a decision now. He hasn't made a decision, and oh, by the way, we can't do the decision. They just bunged it into cash. But not only did they all go and sell it all and stick it in cash, they put it in non-interest bearing cash. So, we went, go through the advice process, give them the advice. They took months and months and months of due diligence. And, they finally, after waiting ages and ages, we, on the behalf of the client, made a formal complaint about the delays. Because it's like, right, well, 75 was technically the cutoff. We started this process at 76. It'll be 77. It'll be 90 by the time you finish. You guys seem to you'll be finished with it. So we helped to move a formal complaint saying, look, hurry the hell up. This is not acceptable. But also within that complaint, and I went to town on this, was how the heck are you allowed, with all this talk of consumer duty and putting clients first and making sure they're not taking unnecessary risks and you're giving them their interest that's currently yours, are you not providing any interest from that date? So he's lost out on 18 months of growth, interest rate on what was the significant north of £800,000. Plus, had you have done this sooner, you would have been invested into our low cost globally diversified portfolio. We converted them to USD, so we made them take into account the fact that he lost out on a lot of FX gains because of how long it took beyond their normal 3 months. And what effectively happened is the before he met us, they gave him the interest he should have been earning on the cash. And then since he met us, when it went past a 3-month period, which is kind of like that grace period you allow these schemes to faff about in, the months after that was delayed, they then gave the lost returns from had he converted to our advice portfolio and done it. And overall, over that time period, it was just about 18 months between being 2/3 of that sitting in cash and then, sitting 4 or 5 months in our portfolio, in our USD advised portfolio, he lost out. They gave him an extra, 12%, whatever it was, in additional income for it, which the client was rather happy about, as I would be if I got an extra £97,000. Remember that, Dom, when you got bonus season?
So it started off as circa 800k, and the eventual transfer was towards around 900k in the end. Then.
Yeah, yes, exactly. I think it ended up being 833k, and we ended up getting him it ended up being 927,000 or something like that he got. So yes, a very successful man who got a nice extra kind of bonus. And again, wouldn't have known that themselves.
Yeah, and it goes to highlight. So, for example, on this case, like our initial and ongoing advice fees, I guess, have been paid for umpteen years to go. And this is the thing that often for retail clients, you only know what you know, and you won't know that you've actually been disadvantaged by your provider unless you're working with a good financial advisor who knows what they're doing. And again, here at Cameron James, we have a very strong administration backing. So, whilst Jonathan would have been at the forefront with this, we also have our transfer department that we'll be following up consistently with the Diligence team to find out what's going on. So it really is a case sometimes with clients, you can massively help them when they weren't even aware of it. What did the clients say, Jonathan, when you shared the news with them?
Well, I can't show you everything because there are a lot of positive swear words in there, but no, they were really chuffed and happy, as was his existing advisor in there. If I'm ever in his neck of the woods, so he's taking me out for dinner. Which where he lives is quite expensive, so that's quite nice. But he was very, very happy and chuffed. And again, he wouldn't have known about it. It's one of those. It's a little bit like, you hark on about this a lot, as do others, but when you're looking to choose an advisor, if you go down the cheap route, obviously it ends up not being the cheap route because they were hitting costs or they missed out on things, or they're inefficient or delays that cost you money, etc., etc. But this case, you got an advisor, and it's sometimes a situation where your interests align. Because yes, I am a incredibly ethical, self-righteous person, and if I think anyone's been wronged, I will go to the nth degree to right that wrong, help them right that wrong. But also at the same time, the incentives are there for us as well, because now we've got a client with more money funds under advice, as it were, because we fought tooth and nail for that. So it does kind of show you sometimes where you do have interest aligned that ends up being very financially efficient and rewarding for both parties, which is exactly what you want. It creates those the positive incentives. But yeah, very happy client. And was an ordeal. We had to go back and forth, letter after letter in some cases, but this is also the advantage, of us, me being an FCA authorized advisor. I deal with the UK pension schemes all the time. I deal with UK residents. I get all the industry stuff or professional stuff that comes through. I understand what is good when a client does something wrong, or a firm does something wrong. I hear about it. I know what's what. I know how things are being, funds are being repatriated if anything's gone wrong and all this. So I know, I'm like, hang on, I've seen that before. I read about that, or I've got personal experience of that. So I know these are the buttons we need to press because you've been wrong there. Whereas if you're only dealing, if you're external to this and you don't deal with UK clients and you're not authorized by the FCA to deal with UK clients, even though for this client our UK authorization was technically irrelevant, it does mean we're at the coalface, as it were, here in the UK. And I just said, look, I know there's no way the FCA, the Ombudsman, would tolerate that. When you look at all this stuff about platforms and not paying enough cash interest and paying compensation, there's no way you're going to allow to be sit paying no interest on 800 something thousand pounds. It's just bonkers. And ever since that, I put a bit between our teeth, and we went and fought for the client. And obviously, yeah, the client is £97,000. £97,000 welfare, which is not it's quite a tidy sum, as they say.
Yeah, and also it raises a really interesting point when we're at the beginning of the advice process of a client who obviously have what's called a letter of authority, which we place on file with their UK pension scheme, which allows us to talk to them, email them, call them, whatever we need to do to get the information across. Sometimes clients have reservations about signing a letter of authority. They feel like they're moving their pension, or what will Aviva say, or what will XYZ pension scheme say if they know I'm considering to transfer out. The answer is absolutely nothing. They're not going to change your pension scheme. But in this instance, again, by trusting your financial advisor, saying, okay, I like Jonathan, or I like Dominic, or whichever Cameron James financial advisor it is, sign the letter of authority and let people get on with the work. They can't transfer your pension. They can't do anything with it. You still need to sign 10 to 15 rounds of paperwork, possibly even wet signatures at times before you can do a transfer, but it does allow us in the background to be fighting your corner. So again, Jonathan, what's your experience sometimes with clients with letters of authority when they're sort of feeling a bit apprehensive about signing a letter of authority? What's your sort of general conversation with clients?
Yeah, no, it does depend. Sometimes clients are, obviously very trusting and they'll go straight forward, but there'll be others, especially those who've ever dealt, especially those who have moved overseas and have probably been bombarded on LinkedIn, or on their phone from not expat advisors, cowboys, as sometimes they're referred to, who they just have trust issues, or maybe they got burnt previously and they don't want to go through this, they don't want to sign anything. And in this day and age, you got to be careful, review everything you sign. You hear horror stories and all that. So there are those who are just like, oh, don't really want to sign anything. Can I go and get the information? And then sometimes, you can, and maybe there are some circumstances where you got a really apprehensive client, and maybe they've just been burnt and they don't want to sign anything, and you got to build that trust, and where you'll be like, right, well, here's the things you need to do to go and get it. But unfortunately, invariably, it leads to loads of issues. There's missing information. You can't control the process. It takes a 3-week process and turns into a 3-month process. So it's one of those where if you really are, take advantage of the free service. It's at our expense. We pay all these staff to go off and do all these things. They go and chase all these schemes. They know what to chase. They know when they get the information back. They know what's missing. They know what I need to produce advice and compare what your scheme is and all the options and stuff. Whereas most people don't. And you might get a big pack thinking, oh, that must have all the information. Here you go, Jonathan. Please go and give me advice. And actually what happens is it hasn't got half the information I need, or oftentimes sometimes it's not even your pension scheme. Like actually, just gone into my head right now. The client we're talking about earlier, he was sent the wrong client's information. So there was a big data protection breach during this whole process as well, which again, hopefully kind of, I guess, spooked them to pay up and stop this saga. So really having an expert there who knows what you want will speed up your process. Will make sure you got more thorough advice as well, because especially for non-UK residents, a lot of the rules around what constitutes advice levels, whether it's disclosure and the level of analysis and stuff, is rubbish. To put it in very professional terms, rubbish. Whereas because we are, all our advisors are FCA authorized, it might not, your advice if it's overseas won't be FCA authorized, but we know what's required to give UK FCA regulated advice, and we will give the same level of quality and scrutiny and comparison analysis to our non-UK residents as we do our UK residents. We will make sure any information we obtain would sufficiently be to check all the boxes that we required as if you were a UK resident. So that's another thing as well. There are some things where I think maybe they need to change the name. Letter of authority sounds a bit ominous, in my view. Like, why am I giving you authority over my account? That sounds, when in reality it's just an information sharing. We can't do anything, but so maybe a letter of information sharing or something. A LOIS. There you go. Well, that rings a bell. That's quite a good one. I might push for that, but I think
Yeah, and for me as CEO, sometimes it's almost a consideration that I see it time and time again. And say out of 100 pension transfers we do, you might have the 1 or 2 times that a client is very reluctant to sign a letter of authority, and kind of between a rock and a hard place, because we want to help everyone here at Cameron James, but in these esoteric situations, the pension transfer and the advice process is always elongated because the client wants to obtain the information themselves. They don't want to sign the letter of authority. They send a screenshot from their online platform that doesn't really clearly include the ISIN code, so we can't do the proper FE analytics in the background. So it's hard for me, and sometimes I feel like saying, no, hard and fast rule. If the letter of authority is signed, we're not even going to provide advice, but we do want those clients who have maybe been burnt, maybe have had bad experiences in the industry, whatever provider or whoever it might be. But it's always a tricky one. But as Jonathan says, take the advice which is for free. We have to go away and put together your regulated and authorised advice report, circa 35 pages long, giving our transfer rationale. And obviously we have to be able to justify why a transfer makes sense for you. Otherwise we simply can't provide you with the advice. So I'd always encourage clients, like in this example with the gentleman, allow Jonathan and the team to get on with the hard work in the background whilst he got on with the rest of his life. And that's really the value of the letter of authority. Jonathan, any final comments on this, of anyone or anyone else?
One really good, unfortunately horrible, morbid example of this is someone I'm dealing with at the moment. They had been, they live in an island in Europe. They had been approached by one of these offshore firms. They'd sort of given provided advice and quoted advice that we wouldn't have been able to give or quote because it was on insufficient information, which again kind of tells you the difference between our approach and others, which is to get all the information. Can't tell people what they're going to do until you know all the facts. It's a bit like, I'm not going to give a prognosis on, mechanics not going to tell you what's wrong with your car unless you can lift up the hood and have a look around. But really reluctant, and he kind of wanted to make a decision on the advisor before he signed all the letters of authority. Now, that's a common kind of situation we sometimes come across, where the people go, look, I'm going for my due diligence. Once I've chosen someone, then I'll sign all the forms. However, in reality, you can't really make a decision on a financial advisor until you see what they're going to do, because they'll tell you anything and everything until they're actually they're putting their neck on the line, giving an authorized, regulated advice report. So you actually want to have all the information, get formal advice reports provided before you choose your advisor. That's the best way to do it. And in this situation, this client had a few health issues, heart issues, was wanting to make a decision. They just retired abroad, really wanted to make sure him and his wife, with all their different pension pots, which they had a lot, they wanted to trust someone, and then they were going to do letter of authority. However, unfortunately, absolutely awful, chasing up this chap and get a hold of his wife, and she says, oh, I'm so sorry, he's passed away. So during this whole period, his health issues had deteriorated. He passed away. I only know the names of his accounts. I don't have all I don't know what type of pension they are, how their pension, whereas had he have signed, whether it was me or another advisor, we'd have all this information. I'd be able to help with all the beneficiary stuff, making sure his wife isn't going to get into money trouble, because we'll be able to get the money passed over in the most tax efficient manner, which again, as a non-UK resident, brings up all sorts of issues. And again, it's one of those examples where sometimes, the reluctance to make a decision can have absolutely horrible impacts, both for you but also for your loved ones. And again, it's where building that trust and the whole ethos of Cameron James and being as transparent as we can. We try and hopefully elicit loads of trust and by being how open and honest and transparent we are in here, and with our clients, that you won't have these situations which are obviously horrible. But yeah, that's quite an extreme example, but it can show sign the form, get the information, and again, it doesn't commit you to Cameron James. If you sign all that form and I get all the information and I produce an advice report, don't have to choose me. You can go, thanks, Jonathan, but blah 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 down the road's offering to do it for less, and I only care about fees, so I'm going to go with him or something like that. And we'll go, here you go, here's all the information pack. It's not our information, it's your information. It's all yours, and we'll share everything with you anyway over the course of the information gathering process. But that other advisor can go off and produce their own suitability report as well, and then you can go and compare it. So just because you've given that advisor the permission to go and get the information doesn't mean that's the advisor you're going to use. I've had a few cases where I've gone and done all the information, and the other advisor, they've chosen another advisor afterwards. Now, in 3 of the case times that happened, 2 of them came back saying, "Oh, I shouldn't have done that," but that's the case. That's the case sometimes.
Yeah, and I think I see this a lot as well. Like, I'm often reviewing, I'm not so client facing anymore, but I'm helping the advisory team where they're dealing with, say, difficult cases or bringing them to me. And something I see very common on email chains is, dear Andire, dear John, dear whoever financial advisor, I'm currently considering which financial advisor I'm going to work with. And I'm kind of a bit like lost. And I'm like, hang on a minute, I thought you hadn't provided an advice report yet. And the team are like, no, we haven't even done a letter of authority yet. And I'm like, so hang on. This client saying in writing that they're going to come back to you once they've decided who they're going to work with, but you haven't even given them any advice yet. You don't even know what platform, what SIPP, what underlying investments, past performance, cost, volatility. You don't know any of this yet. How could they possibly make a decision? And I think sometimes viewers and listeners, when you're going through a financial advice journey, I would recommend you to go as far as possible in that financial advice journey with any financial advisor that you're considering to work with, because during that process, you will see their levels of professionalism. Anyone can sit in a call or face-to-face meeting and get you lunch or sit on Zoom and say they're fantastic. The proof is in the pudding. Sign the letter of authority, get it in, see how fast they work, how hard do they get information back, what's the quality of their report, what's the quality of their paperwork, is it littered with mistakes? Because this is before they've even got your money at the financial advisory firm, so you can think that after that their service levels may drop off. Here at Cameron James, I'm pleased to say our service levels don't drop off. We treat initial and ongoing clients in exactly the same way. But yeah, it baffles me sometimes that clients think that they're so risk averse in a way of signing paperwork with financial advisors, when I actually think you should always push yourself to get as far down that advice process as possible to really, really learn who they are as a firm.
Because actually that is the risky, you think you're being risk averse and you're not making, but actually you're making a decision without the full information. And I'll oftentimes have a client who goes, "Oh, well, John, well, it sounds great and stuff, but he's got this cool DFM, and then their fees are lower than yours." And I'll go, "I doubt it, considering we're much lower than average in the UK, and again, for the value you get for the services and all the rest of it." I'm like, what did they send you? Because we say, when I put my advice report, send it to anyone. It's above reproach. No one can tear that apart. We'll defend our advice we give with every effort of our being. So send us what they sent. And every time, it's never not happened. I get something through from the client going, "Oh, this is what he sent me," and I'm going, "Well, that's borderline a lie. That's missing fees. That's missing fees. So he told you it was 1.5%, but there's actually more like 3%. Plus the performance is rubbish. He's massaged the figures or used figures that are incorrect. He's used past performance, but in reality it was a DFN that was chopping and changing things. So in reality the returns were much lower." And again, those are the types of things you're not going to fully get unless you get a fully regulated advice report and you compare. Because if you've got our report, which is an all singing, all dancing report that would pass muster with the FCA, or FCA quality advice, and you compare it to a lot of these other reports you're getting, even in the US, in Europe, and you'll go, "Right, well, Jonathan's told me these 4 things, but there's only 3 things here. Where's the 4th thing?" And in reality, there's actually like 7 things there, because there's all sorts of fees squirreled away and other things that are missing, and all the rest of it. And again, you need to make a decision, for a decision with all the information. This is your future, your family's future here. You can't rush into these things. You can't make decisions without knowing all the options. You don't buy a car without assessing all the options and how much each costs and what does it do and what the safety features and how long does it take to charge, or how many miles does it get, or how efficient it is. And the same should be for your financial advice. And unfortunately, that will mean you have to give someone permission to look under the hood. But that's all it is. It's just permission to have a look. And, you can get that information and you can pass it on to, another advisor at the same time. And we'll go, oh, look at all that work we did chasing for it. But that's the case. And I'm sure it's happened in our situation where we've asked for advice and information, and then the clients had it because they had another advisor go and obtain it for them. So it does swing around about. So that's a really, really good point. And you can't make a decision unless you have all the information.
Indeed. All right. Well, Jonathan, thank you very much for your time this morning and sharing that very detailed client situation. So thank you for joining this morning, John.
Yeah, more than welcome.
All right, viewers, as always, take care of your UK pension assets. And if you'd like to have a conversation with myself or Jonathan, use the Calendly link below to book a day and a time which is suitable for you. And as always, take care of your UK pension assets.